Even while still in the shipyard, U-Boat 65 made people uneasy, not because of its design, not because of its engineering, but because of a lingering feeling like the vessel itself didn't want to be born. Accidents followed one after another, and when it finally took to the sea, something seemed to have gone with it, something that didn't belong among the living. In 1970, somewhere in the misty ocean, U-65 resurfaced without warning. No distress call, no response, no crew. Just a cold, steel shell that still carried warmth inside. Perhaps what returned was not what had departed. Or worse, it had never left at all. The submarine that didn't want to be launched. No one remembers exactly when the feeling began. Only that, during the early months of assembling U-Boat 65, the atmosphere in the shipyard grew inexplicably heavy. A seasoned welder was crushed between two hull plates despite no crane being operated at the time. Days later, the chief engineer was found dead, neck broken, in a compartment that had been locked from the outside. The door had never been opened. No cameras were ever installed. No one knew how he had gotten in. People started whispering that the submarine didn't want to touch the water. They called it Das Unglücksschiff, the unlucky ship. But the German Navy didn't believe in omens. Orders came down: accelerate the schedule. Finish the machinery in 3 weeks instead of 6. Command wanted it out to sea as quickly as possible, almost as if speed could shake off whatever had already sunk its claws into the steel frame. No one dared say it aloud, but the fear was there. They were afraid of a vessel that had never lived, but somehow already knew how to kill. Deaths without pattern. The accidents aboard U-65 didn't feel like accidents. They felt like warnings, but no one was clear-headed enough to understand them. On the very first test run, while the submarine was still docked, 2 crewmen were crushed beneath the hatch of the ammunition chamber. No one had touched the controls. No one had been near the mechanism. They had just stepped down when the steel door, hundreds of kilograms heavy, slammed shut. Like a trap sprung at the exact moment. Weeks later, while the vessel was moored awaiting orders to deploy, a mechanic suddenly collapsed in the engine room. The air filled with the thick stench of chemicals, but not a single gas sensor triggered an alert. He suffocated within meters of his crewmates, none of whom noticed until it was too late. All they remembered was a faint hissing sound threading through the ventilation. And something else, a whisper, brushing past the ear. After that, one sailor swore he saw a short, broad figure standing inside the torpedo room, a compartment that was locked from the outside. He was certain no one had clearance to enter that area at night, and no one had a key. They searched the entire vessel, every inch, but found nothing. Only a lingering chill clung to the metal railings, like the breath of something that had just passed by and wasn't ready to leave. Footsteps and shadows in the night. Not long after U-65's first voyage, communications officer Carl Neumann began recording things that couldn't be filed through standard protocol. In his personal journal, he wrote night shift, 2:15. I heard clear footsteps, heavy, metallic, and fast running down the corridor, but no one was allowed out of their quarters during deep watch hours. I opened the door. No one there, just the smell of old engine smoke and the feeling that someone had been standing right next to me. A week later, during mild turbulence at sea, the vessel shuddered unevenly. No one spoke, but everyone heard it, knocking from the forward compartment, the very place where the first death had occurred. 3 knocks, then 4, then relentless pounding, as if someone inside were desperately trying to escape. The commanding officer rushed to unlock the hatch. The room was empty. Not a single object had shifted. No sign of water intrusion. But every man on board knew 10 people don't share the same hallucination. After that night, 3 crewmen quietly submitted transfer requests. One of them, an engineer named Brandt, vanished while the submarine was docked at a resupply port. All that remained were his boots neatly placed by the edge of the deck. No farewell note. No witness saw him leave. A bunkmate wrote down a single sentence. Brandt said someone was walking through his dreams, and when he woke up, the footsteps were still echoing in his ears. The fateful surfacing when the submarine returned without its crew. On the morning of July 10th, 1917, as thick fog clung to the northern sea, crew members aboard the escort ship HMS Violet spotted an unusual silhouette rising from the waterlong. Cold and motionless, like a ghost waiting to be named. The alert level was raised, weapons loaded, surrender signals sent in rapid succession, but the object made no response. No lights, no movement. The silent vessel wasn't wreckage. It wasn't some forgotten ruin. It was a German U-boat, and the faded numbers along its steel hull confirmed it. This was U-65. There were no bullet holes, no signs of fire or damage. The hatch stood slightly ajar, as if someone had just stepped out minutes before. When the British boarding team climbed aboard, they expected confrontation, or at least an explanation. What greeted them instead was a silence so dense it felt physical. No bodies, no blood, not a single trace of panic or escape. Everything was intact, an unfinished cup of water, a navigation map still stretched across the table, bunks half folded as if someone had been preparing to rest. The submarine was empty, but it felt alive, like the crew had only just stepped away for a moment. The problem was none of them ever returned, and, to this day, no one has answered the question if no one was left aboard. Who brought U-65 back to the surface, vanished records, and the order of silence. After its fateful surfacing, U-65 was never towed back to port as evidence. It was marked not to be retrieved in a sealed military document, and then it vanished. No one knows exactly what happened to the submarine afterward. Some claimed it was scuttled on the spot. Others insisted it was quietly towed away, disappearing along with every official record that ever mentioned it. The German Navy immediately classified all documents relating to U-65 as restricted from internal circulation. The roster of officers who had served on board was edited, with several names quietly removed from military archives. When the war ended, no official report about the submarine's fate was ever released. U-65 appeared in no naval textbooks. There was no memorial, no investigation ever concluded. Strangest of all the British Navy, those who had witnessed with their own eyes the moment that empty submarine rose from the sea, never spoke of it again. They recorded the event in a few dry, bureaucratic lines, and then let it vanish into oblivion, only in scattered diary entries, or slurred memories over half-finished glasses of rum. Does the story of U-65 occasionally resurface like a ghost flickering through the minds of those still living? A name no one wants to utter, but none dare deny. Not everyone who vanishes is gone. The British sailors present that day are still alive in the records, but few of them ever spoke about it again. One of them, after retiring from service, left behind a single line in his personal memoir, "I wasn't afraid because there was no one on board. I was afraid because something might have been looking back at us from the dark. No one had proof, no photographs, no recordings. But the feeling was unanimous the moment they stepped into U-65. It felt like trespassing into a space that wasn't ready to be reclaimed. As if the vessel had not truly been abandoned, just no longer meant for the living. The story of U-65 has never been fully closed. Scattered rumors of a numberless submarine drifting in the North Sea, of strange electromagnetic signals transmitted from a blank spot on the map are always pushed aside, as if no one wants to reopen the file. Yet sometimes, buried deep in reports, no one bothers to read. Lines of corrupted data still flicker to life, broadcasting from nowhere in particular on a frequency once used by U-65. Maybe what disappeared with the crew that day wasn't human. Or maybe it never left. It's just waiting for someone bold enough to listen. More than 100 meters beneath the surface of the Barents Sea, where the pressure can crush steel like tinfoil, a group of men was still alive. Not for seconds, not for minutes, but for hours. They wrote on damp sheets of paper, with bare hands and the dying beam of a flashlight, "We are still here." Above them, the surface remained completely silent. No rescue signal, no hatch was opened. And when international divers were finally allowed access, they realized, had they arrived just 48 hours earlier, lives could have been saved. Why did one of Russia's most advanced submarines explode in the middle of a training exercise? Why did the government refuse all outside help for 4 full days? And down in that crushing darkness, what exactly did they hear before everything fell silent for good? The unsinkable warship. When Kursk sliced through the Barents Sea in August 2000, no one thought of death. They were riding a steel beast, 154 meters long, weighing nearly 19,000 tons, a nuclear fortress capable of diving hundreds of meters in silence and obliterating a fleet of aircraft carriers with a single button. Armed with 24 P-700 Granite cruise missiles hidden in its belly, Kursk was more than just a submarine. It was a political message. We are still strong. To the military, it was untouchable. Every time it left port, it carried the power of a small nation. The sailors who stepped aboard weren't preparing for war, they were reinforcing a statement. The exercise in the Barents Sea wasn't a battle, it was a demonstration. A reminder to the world that Russia's Northern Fleet still had teeth. But the ocean has no respect for pride. And just hours after Kursk departed Severomorsk, the weapon, once declared unsinkable, began to sink. Not because of an enemy, but because of a deadly trust placed in the steel that wrapped around them. One explosion, 2 mysteries. On the morning of August 12th, the surface of the Barents Sea appeared calm, but deep below, steel had already begun to tear. A small explosion echoed at 11:28 a.m., just strong enough for Norwegian seismic stations to detect. Its force was equivalent to 200 kilograms of TNT, not massive, but out of place. Then, 35 seconds later, a second blast erupted 10 times more powerful. The entire region shook, as if something enormous had been ripped in half. Kursk stopped transmitting. An explanation was issued quickly. A torpedo in the launch bay had detonated spontaneously due to a hydrogen peroxide leak, an aggressive oxidizer. Dangerous if not properly stabilized. The submarine was testing a new variant, and its safety systems may not have been ready, but the numbers didn't sit still. The first explosion was too weak to cause a disaster. The second, too strong and too late. A 2-minute gap between blasts is highly irregular for any technical failure. Those who know the mechanics of underwater weapons understand when something fails catastrophically. It doesn't wait 2 minutes. Data from a civilian radar in Norway preserved one odd detail, a small signal moving close to Kursk's position shortly before contact was lost. Its shape and speed were undetermined, just a faint light, drifting across the screen, then gone. Some began to whisper about a collision. No one witnessed Kursk's destruction, but its aftershock traveled outward through cold water, through international warning systems, leaving two sharp marks on the graph. One explosion, then another, and finally, a long silence where everything simply ceased. Compartment 9, 23 men and 8 sheets of paper. After the first explosion, the front of Kursk was crushed, but the rear remained intact. 23 men, those not near the blast center, survived and gradually moved to Compartment 9, a narrow technical chamber near the stern. The last place where a watertight door could be sealed, the last place with air. Inside, it was pitch black. They used handheld flashlights. Some were injured, some coughed up blood. But no one screamed. No one panicked. They pulled batteries from broken devices, rationed out each remaining minute of light. Water seeped from ruptured pipes. The oxygen filters had failed, and they knew it. Sailor Dmitry Kolesnikov took out a sheet of paper. His handwriting was neat and steady, as if logging a routine shift. All of us from Compartment 6, 7, and 8 made it here. We can't get out. He listed every name, 23 men. Alive, breathing, waiting, but no answer came. The air began to sour. Skin began to burn. They tried to activate the backup oxygen generator, but the chemical reaction misfired, releasing toxic gas instead. On the 8th sheet, the ink had blurred from seawater, leaving only a few legible lines in 15. No one left. When divers finally reached Kursk more than a week later, they found bodies curled together and 8 damp sheets of paper, still bearing human handwriting written in darkness, with bare hands, to mark the final hours of those who refused to die quietly. Rescue denied. Immediately after Kursk lost contact, Russian naval officials stated the submarine is experiencing communication issues. No alarm was raised. No call for assistance was made, just a quiet deployment of a few search units across the cold surface of the Barents Sea. Meanwhile, Western sonar stations had already picked up signs that something was wrong. The UK and Norway, both equipped with advanced submarine rescue technology, offered help within the first 24 hours. Russia's response remained the same. We can handle it ourselves. For 4 days, the Barents Sea remained still. No one was allowed near the wreck site. No public distress signals were issued. When international diving teams were finally permitted to access the submarine, it was already August 20th. They arrived with robotic arms, pressure drills, and a final shred of hope. What they found was cold seawater and a silent steel shell. Later, in brief press conferences, Norwegian specialists confirmed had they arrived just 48 hours earlier, they likely could have opened Compartment 9, where 23 men had fought to stay alive. That hatch was not permanently sealed. It only needed time. Time that had been denied. The real reason for the delay was never officially acknowledged. Some say the Russian Navy feared exposing classified nuclear submarine designs. Others believe the government already knew no one had survived, and the entire rescue effort was just for show. But one thing is certain: while the world stood outside, the men inside Kursk sat in the dark, waiting. Inconsistent data. Russia claimed that everyone aboard Kursk died instantly during the explosion, but the 8 damp sheets of paper found in compartment 9 told a different story. The person who wrote them was alert recording names, time markers, and hour-by-hour developments, a testimony from within, entirely at odds with the narrative broadcast outside. Another red flag appeared when investigators discovered burn marks on the aft compartment walls. Someone had attempted to activate the backup oxygen system. Soot surrounded the valve. Blistered fingerprints marked the casing, which meant that after the second explosion, someone was still moving, still trying to stay alive, even if no one could hear them. The location where the wreck was found also didn't match initial reports. Kursk was said to be conducting torpedo drills at a fixed coordinate, yet its remains were located nearly 40 kilometers to the southwest, a distance that shouldn't have existed if everything had gone according to plan. Retired naval experts in Russia cautiously pointed to a detail. Few were willing to acknowledge signs of a collision prior to the first blast. They mentioned the USS Toledo and USS Memphis, 2 American submarines reportedly operating covertly in the Barents Sea at the time. No hard evidence has ever surfaced, only a chilling coincidence and a collection of route logs that, to this day, remain tightly sealed, the forgotten and the final message. When the salvage team finally reached Kursk's remains at the end of 2000, everything felt as heavy as the ship itself. All 118 crew members lay still inside the warped steel hull, frozen in various positions, some clutching each other, some slumped over control panels, some still wearing their watches. Not a single soul had survived. Among the items recovered was a piece of paper, folded in thirds and carefully tucked into the pocket of sailor Dmitry Kolesnikov. The ink had blurred from seawater, but the final line remained legible. Just one sentence. With no date, no time, don't despair. I love you. Natasha. When this detail was made public, Russian television fell into an uncharacteristic hush. People placed flowers in city squares. Children drew submarines in crayon, but from the government, there were no resignations. No one was held accountable. Not a single apology was spoken aloud. In 2001, Russia raised Kursk's hull from the sea floor using a massive floating platform. But the bow, where the initial explosion had occurred, was cut off and destroyed underwater. They said it was for safety reasons. Interior photographs of the blast chamber. None were released. Navigation logs. Lost or classified. And most of the truth, if any, still exists, likely remains somewhere on the seabed of the Barents, where steel and silence have fused into one. 4 days after Titan vanished beneath the Atlantic, the knocking was still being heard. The sound echoed through sonar networks 3 knocks at a time, repeating every 30 minutes, as if someone were tapping on a door from a place no one survives, while the world prayed, searched, and waited. Another piece of data remained silent. The U.S. Navy had already detected an underwater implosion just 1 hour after Titan lost contact. If the sub had already exploded on the first day, then 4 days later, who was making those sounds? And why? Even now, does no one dare to answer? The vessel that should never have gone down there. Titan wasn't a military-grade submarine, and it never pretended to be. It had no reinforced steel hull, no escape chamber, no independent backup systems. Its entire body was built from carbon fiber composite, a material praised in aerospace, but never proven safe at depths beyond 3,000 meters. OceanGate didn't seek certification from any independent safety authority. They designed it themselves, tested it themselves, and confidently called it a revolutionary step in deep-sea exploration. Inside Titan, there was no control room filled with glowing panels and switches like in documentaries. Instead, it used a Logitech gaming controller connected to a custom Bluetooth system, not because they couldn't afford better gear, but because they believed that was enough. On their official website, OceanGate proudly declared, "You don't need rigid protocols. You need people who think differently." And think differently they did. They believed that if you approached the deep sea with the spirit of a tech startup, nimble, unconventional, unbound by old rules, the ocean would respond in kind. But the ocean doesn't follow human logic. It doesn't care if you're a pioneer, a disruptor, or a dream funded by venture capital. It only measures what you can actually withstand, and if you fall short, it crushes the rest without warning. Titan embodied that belief, bold, ambitious, sleek, and promising access to places few had reached. But in an environment where pressure can crumple solid steel in the space of a heartbeat, there are no second chances. One crack, one unseen weakness, and everything disappears faster than you can even speak its name. An explosion heard very early on. Titan lost contact exactly 1 hour and 45 minutes after beginning its descent. At that moment, all the world knew was this: the connection had dropped. There were no returning signals, and a cold, heavy silence settled in. But that silence wasn't entirely empty. That very same day, a highly sensitive underwater monitoring system operated by the U.S. Navy detected something unusual, a loud, underwater noise, consistent with an implosion, coming precisely from the area where Titan had been diving. The data was transmitted almost immediately, and then nothing happened. No announcement, no alarm, not even a single official line. While search teams were dispatched across the ocean, the world was left to believe that perhaps Titan was still out there, trapped but intact. It took 4 full days for the implosion to be acknowledged, and by that time, whatever faint hopes had remained may have already been false from the very beginning, or worse. They were hopes that someone deliberately allowed to continue, the knocking no one could explain. Amid the deep currents and murky movement of the sea, a different sound began to emerge. 3 knocks spaced out like an irregular heartbeat echoed steadily through sonar systems. Every 30 minutes, 3 more. Not frantic, not rushed. As if someone, somewhere, was calmly, patiently tapping out a signal. No shouting, no cries for help. Just knocking, steady, unshaken. Rescue teams held their breath. The news spread quickly. Someone aboard Titan might still be alive with enough oxygen, enough strength, and enough hope that someone, somewhere, was listening. A sliver of possibilities suddenly became a media storm. Sonar maps were drawn, aircraft scanned the seas. Deep-sea robots launched around the clock. But when Titan's wreckage was found days later, those knocks were given another name: noise. No one mentioned the rhythmic signals again. No recordings were released, though many systems reportedly captured them. There were no technical briefings, no public acoustic analysis. All the data vanished along with the sub. And the most chilling question still hangs in the silence. If Titan imploded on day 1, then who was knocking? Every 30 minutes, for 4 days straight. Or more precisely, where did those sounds truly come from? The data doesn't match, and time has no shape. Titan began its descent at 800. By 9:45, all communication was lost. Just minutes later, a loud, abrupt sound was picked up by a classified sonar array deep beneath the sea, a sharp, crushing impact, like a hollow sphere collapsing in an instant. For those who understood such signals, the meaning was clear. This was the sound of death. But when questioned, the Navy merely stated we detected an anomaly. No confirmation, no denial. And out in the world above, people still believed Titan was just temporarily out of contact. Search maps were updated hourly. Press briefings echoed the same phrase again and again. We have not given up hope. One passenger's family later recalled receiving an email from OceanGate that very afternoon, an automated trip update, ending with a simple line, "Everything is proceeding as planned." If Titan had already been crushed hours earlier, how could that message still have been sent? When the story ended, no one could establish a precise timeline. There was no synchronized log, no recreated descent record, only scattered timestamps, fragmented facts, and long silences that stretched as endlessly as the sea floor. And within all those missing pieces, one feeling remained. Something was never told. Warnings that were ignored. Before Titan ever reached the sea floor, a series of warnings had already surfaced. But instead of being heard, they drowned beneath slides about disruptive thinking and limitless innovation spaces. In 2018, one of OceanGate's most senior engineers, the man overseeing their testing protocols, officially left the company. His reason, clearly stated in internal documents, disagreement over safety standards. He believed Titan's carbon fiber hull couldn't endure repeated dives without degrading. OceanGate disagreed. They trusted their own data, their own software, and their own testing done in environments that were, notably, not the bottom of the ocean. That same year, a group of international experts co-signed a letter sent directly to OceanGate. It wasn't an attack, just a firm caution without third-party certification. Titan should not be operating commercially at such depths. No threats, no accusations, just a warning. And that warning, too, was shelved and forgotten. On their homepage, OceanGate once proudly declared, "True innovation lives outside the safety zone." But some zones don't allow survivors to return and tell the tale. The ocean doesn't care if you're a visionary. It only listens to structure. And structure had already spoken. Long before humans were willing to hear, the ocean is silent, but the story isn't over. After 4 days scouring the surface, search teams finally located Titan's wreckage, resting quietly less than 500 meters from its intended dive site. Not far, not deeper than expected. Just right there, as if it had never gone anywhere at all, only slipped off the radar and out of human comprehension. OceanGate issued a brief statement. The implosion was instantaneous. Caused by the hull's failure under pressure, no pain, no suffering. A death as swift as a flash of lightning in the dark ocean deep. A few days later, the company shut down. No press conference, no in-depth response, no official reconstruction of what had gone wrong. The entire tragedy was wrapped in a single familiar phrase, a rare accident. But for those who had followed from the beginning, things didn't end so cleanly. No one released an exact timestamp of the implosion. No one fully addressed the 4 days of rhythmic knocking. No acoustic reports. No thorough legal investigation. Everything simply faded, just as the ocean always does. Swallowing, then hiding. Some stories don't end because we understand them. They end when no one dares to ask again. And with Titan, The world seems to have chosen silence, just like the sea. But silence doesn't mean it's over. It wasn't a dead zone. No storms. No enemies. Just a stretch of ocean deep. Cold. And so silent you could hear whale engines from hundreds of kilometers away. So when the SUS system picked up a strange sequence of sounds on May 22nd, 1968, like metal fracturing, then going quiet in seconds, people knew something had just ended. Not long after, the submarine USS Scorpion vanished. No distress call, no final message, but the strangest part, the U.S. Navy seemed to start searching, even before officially declaring it missing. If no one knew the submarine was in trouble, why did they act as if they already did? And if it wasn't an accident, what exactly did Scorpion hear before everything sank into the deep? The final journey, a scheduled route, and a destination never reached. On May 20th, 1968, the USS Scorpion departed its temporary base in the Azores, beginning its journey back to its home port in Norfolk, Virginia. It was marked as a safe trip across waters with no conflict, no storms, and no reason for concern. On board were 99 crew members, seasoned sailors with one simple task: return to shore after a long Mediterranean patrol. On the map, Scorpion's course was a straight line across the Atlantic, short, clear, and familiar, and for the first several hours, everything appeared normal. The submarine continued to transmit periodic data. No signs of distress. No reports of technical issues. No final goodbyes. Then, on May 22nd, all signals stopped. For 6 days, the U.S. Navy said nothing. Officially, they declared Scorpion missing under unknown circumstances on June 5th. But declassified documents tell a different story as early as May 23rd. Emergency response teams had already been mobilized. A silent search had begun without media coverage, without notifying families, as if they already knew the submarine was never coming home. And the question remains, what made them act before anyone had even discovered that something had gone wrong? The silence that spoke too soon. No alarm, no press conference, no urgent letters to the families. In the days following Scorpion's disappearance, the U.S. Navy maintained an eerie, chilling silence. It wasn't until June 5th, nearly 2 weeks later, that the public was informed the submarine had gone missing. But the strangest part, high-ranking officials had already been urgently briefed as early as May 22nd, just hours after SOSUS picked up the strange underwater acoustic signature in the North Atlantic, as if they didn't need confirmation, as if they already knew. The difference between an accident and a security emergency is in how people respond. In this case, internal records reveal that the Navy immediately mobilized personnel, assigned a special monitoring unit, and opened classified files, all before any solid evidence indicated that Scorpion was in trouble. The families of the 99 crew members weren't notified. There was no national mourning, no emergency broadcast. All they were told was that the ship was delayed, and then gone. When independent investigators first accessed the declassified files years later, they began asking, was Scorpion really just returning from patrol? Or was it on a mission no one was ever meant to know about? And if that's the case, what exactly was on board that submarine that warranted such a synchronized silence from the entire military apparatus? Grave coordinates at 3,000 meters. In October 1968, after nearly half a year of quiet searching, the U.S. Navy finally located the wreckage of Scorpion. It rested at the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean, about 740 kilometers southwest of the Azores, at a depth exceeding 3,000 meters. But what they found wasn't just a shattered submarine, it was a broken portrait, full of mismatched clues. The hull had split in two. The tail section lay dozens of meters away from the bow, with debris scattered around as if some force from within had detonated and expelled everything outward. Experts in hydrodynamics noted that the damage didn't align with any known external collision. No torpedoes, no ramming, no underwater mines. The steel had buckled inward in reverse. Shielding panels had been blown outward. And yet, what puzzled analysts the most wasn't how the submarine exploded, but where it did. The wreckage site was completely off the route Scorpion was supposed to be following. Instead of heading directly toward Norfolk, it had drifted or perhaps deliberately diverted course, as if on an entirely different mission no one had ever been told about. So the question isn't just, how did the submarine explode? But also, why was it in that exact place, at that exact time, only to vanish forever? The sounds that weren't supposed to be heard. On the night of May 27, 1968, while the surface of the Atlantic remained as calm as ever, a strange series of sounds echoed into the underwater listening posts of SOSUS, the U.S. Navy's deep-sea surveillance network. It wasn't engine noise. It wasn't metal-on-metal collision. It was a sequence of sharp, intermittent cracks lasting nearly 2 minutes, like a massive machine being bent to its breaking point. The acoustic data was recorded in the heart of the ocean, precisely where Scorpion's wreckage would later be found. But analysts quickly noticed something unusual. The sounds didn't match the signature of a torpedo explosion or external impact. There was no single violent blast. Instead, it was a chain of fractures consistent with a pressure hull collapsing slowly under extreme depth, as if something was happening inside, gradually, painfully, and completely unnoticed by the world above. The original recording, the raw audio, has never been released. It remains sealed, encrypted, and accessible only to a select group within the Department of Defense. A few independent experts who were allowed to hear descriptions of the recording believe that this wasn't simply the final moment of a sinking vessel, but an extended, grim sequence, as though a silent battle had taken place at the bottom of the ocean, unseen and never to be told. Theories built on silence. More than half a century has passed, and Scorpion still has no official answer. Not because there are too few theories, but because there are too many, and with each one, the hole only deepens, growing darker, offering less clarity instead of more. The first theory points to technical failure. A weapon on board, possibly a Mark 37 torpedo, may have accidentally detonated inside the storage bay. But here's the problem. The crew was trained for emergencies and would have had time to send a distress signal. So why was no alarm ever raised? And why did the explosion leave almost no scorch marks? No thermal reaction typically seen in live warhead detonations. Another, bolder theory, but one many still believe, claims Scorpion wasn't on a routine patrol. It was shadowing a Soviet submarine, part of a highly classified surveillance mission, and during that pursuit, it was detected and taken out. But this raises its own paradox. If the attack was real, why didn't the U.S. respond? No retaliation, no diplomatic protest, not even a public acknowledgement. Then there are whispers that Scorpion was carrying technology never disclosed to the public, an experimental device or advanced electronic warfare system, and perhaps that very technology caused the chain of failures. Or perhaps It's the reason the entire story remains sealed. But no matter which theory you choose, one truth becomes clear: every explanation only leads to more questions. And in the deepest parts of the ocean, it may be the silence, the space where no answers ever surfaced, that haunts the most. The silence that outlived the crew. Decades after Scorpion sank to the ocean floor, the truth about the submarine never resurfaced with it. A large portion of the related data, including original audio logs, physical analysis reports, and testimonies from the engineers involved in the initial investigation, remains sealed under the National Security Act. No one but a select group with top-secret clearance is allowed access. The families of the crew have filed repeated requests to declassify the documents. All denied. The reason given is always the same: in the interest of national security. Over time, the remaining fragments have only grown blurrier. Some early investigators claimed that key documents mysteriously disappeared just weeks after being created. Backup files showed altered timestamps. The names of signatories had been replaced. Incidents like these aren't just clerical errors, they suggest deliberate erasure. What unsettles people the most is not that Scorpion was lost, but that every institution connected to the incident chose coordinated, prolonged silence. A silence that doesn't feel like standard military confidentiality, but like the concealment of something far greater, not just an explosion, not just a technical failure, perhaps an undisclosed technology, or perhaps an event that the public could never be allowed to know. And to this day, one question still lingers in the deep. What really happened 3,000 meters below the surface? What was so severe that an entire government chose to bury every trace? It lies there, deep beneath a dead coral reef, as if the ocean itself had tried to swallow all memory of it. A massive block of metal, eerily cold, reflecting no light, only drawing in every gaze. No insignia, no identification number, no message from any nation. Every line along its hull bears the look of something never meant to be revealed. And then, the ancient coral clinging to its surface like fossilized scales revealed a chilling secret. This thing has been here for over half a century, right in the heart of the Pacific Ocean, yet no one ever asked. If it doesn't belong to anyone, then who made sure it disappeared? When the coral whispered metal, in June 2015, a group of marine biologists funded by a non-profit organization arrived to survey a lifeless coral reef off the southern Pacific. They weren't searching for mysteries. They were searching for silence, trying to understand why this reef, once marked as a thriving ecosystem on older maps, had turned into a pale limestone graveyard. What remained was a stretch of ghost-white rock, unnervingly still, and a collapsing microbiome fading with each tide. While diving at depths beyond 120 meters, a young biologist spotted an unnatural rise buried beneath layers of thick sediment. He first mistook it for a stone outcrop until his light caught a mirrored surface, too smooth to be rock. It gleamed cold and metallic, like untreated steel, utterly out of place. As the dive team approached and began clearing the covering silt, they fell silent. Before them lay the hull of a vessel, at least 70 meters long. Its bow was embedded in the seabed, its stern twisted as if slammed hard against the ocean floor. But the strangest part, not a single mark, no hull number, no insignia, not even the rescue lines seen on most submarines. This thing had no name. It looked like someone had deliberately left behind a metal ghost, then buried it beneath the ocean inside a dead zone, where no one was ever meant to dive, built to sink. not to return. When the first scan data was brought aboard the research vessel, the team of specialists paused. The object's length, curvature, and general proportions weren't far off from some Soviet nuclear submarines of the 1960s, but a closer look shattered all comparisons. There were no torpedo bays, no escape hatches, no ventilation systems. The entire hull was seamless, like a bullet that had never been chambered. The entry points weren't in the usual places, but sunken into the body as if they could only be opened from the outside. Under the cold glare of the submersible lights, the metal surface shimmered with a strange gray and alloy unknown in any known military registry. It didn't rust, it didn't crack, and it didn't seem to belong to this era. What unsettled the team wasn't excitement, it was unease. This vessel didn't seem built for combat or exploration. It seemed made for a singular purpose: to leave the world of men and never return. A machine designed not for survival, but for severance. A sealed capsule with propulsion not labeled, not waited for, and never meant to be found. A timeline that matches no known war. When the team sent coral samples clinging to the vessel's hull to 3 independent laboratories, they were simply hoping to pinpoint how long the submarine had been abandoned. But what came back wasn't just surprising, it revealed a black hole in modern history. The biological specimens, mostly hard coral and compacted sediment, pointed to an age no one wanted to believe: at least 52 years old. That meant the vessel had been lying almost intact on the ocean floor since around 1963, and no one had ever found it, reported it, or claimed it was missing. But 1963 wasn't a quiet year. It was the height of the Cold War, a time when every nuclear submarine, every patrol route, was tracked down to the nautical mile. No nation, not the US, not the USSR, not the UK, not France, ever reported the loss of a sub in that region. No bulletins, no declassified orders, no maritime records of any search or recovery. So where did this vessel come from? Some speculated it was an off-the-books prototype, never formally commissioned, a project that failed and was quietly buried. Others pushed further, asking if it might be the product of a nation that doesn't exist in public record, a force with no army, no flag, but the ability to build something that outpaced its time. Those questions became even more unsettling when the hull's design was compared with military archives. It didn't match any known class, not even in abandoned schematics. If it didn't fit history, then maybe history deliberately let it slip through without leaving a trace. Those without names, and records that must not exist. Shortly after the team submitted its first report to an International Maritime Security Coordination Center, what they believed was standard procedure for identifying an unknown wreck, everything changed in ways no one expected. A week later, all sonar data, seabed imagery, and biological samples were confiscated under the pretense of violating international security protocols regarding potential military zones. Cloud storage accounts were frozen. Backup hard drives aboard the vessel were seized. Everything that had documented the submarine's existence vanished from the hands of those who had discovered it. No formal notice declared the site a restricted area. No nation stepped forward to claim jurisdiction. But 2 weeks later, the waters around the team's original dive zone were quietly encircled by unflagged survey ships, operating in eerie silence as if they knew exactly what lay beneath. One night, amid strong winds and black waves, the researchers watched through infrared binoculars and saw the strange submarine being hoisted up in sections beneath the red glow of an unmarked crane. By morning, all the vessels were gone. No announcements, no records, just an empty seabed and questions no one dared to ask. One member of the team, who later left marine research altogether, quietly said during a closed seminar, "What chilled me wasn't that they took the sub. It was how they moved, like they'd been there before us. Like we were only repeating a discovery that was always meant to be forgotten." The vessel's name was never released, and in some way, it never existed on any chart. But for those who saw it, they knew something had been buried deep in the sea for a very long time, and very deliberately. If it belongs to no one, then where did it come from? After that quiet recovery operation, marine archaeology groups and independent research institutes began revisiting hundreds of old data logs, notes, and anomalies once dismissed for not matching military maps. To their surprise, they uncovered similar cases, submarine wrecks with no serial numbers, found nestled among coral, buried in seafloor silt, or wedged in deep-sea trenches few had ever explored. No missing reports, no deployment records. No one ever claimed them. One expert, half-jokingly but with a tone that betrayed no humor, remarked, "We didn't uncover a mystery. We uncovered the fact that someone out there is very used to hiding mysteries." International intelligence agencies remained absolutely silent. No confirmations, no denials, only traces old radar echoes. Strange coordinates once overlooked for being non-essential, now beginning to reveal a pattern, or a logic no one dared follow. Theories began to mushroom within academic circles. Most were quickly dismissed for lack of proof, but they planted a deeper unease. If there was once a program to build submarines never recorded in history, who was behind it? Who would possess a vessel with no numbers, no insignia, no escape systems? Who would send such crafts beneath the ocean not to fight, but to vanish? The final question was the one that made even skeptics fall quiet. How many more are still out there lying motionless on the seabed, fed by coral, and forgotten on purpose? The first time it was heard was from a sonar station off the coast of Iceland. A strange sound, repeating at exact 13-hour intervals. It wasn't a distress signal, nor Morse code. It was a human voice, distorted, strained like a computer system struggling to pronounce a command it could never quite complete. The signal kept returning. Day after day, no one knew where it came from. No one claimed ownership. But if you listened long enough, you'd realize it wasn't calling anyone. It was simply reminding the world that it was still there. So in the end, who or what is speaking? First time heard. On a winter morning in 2008, a sonar technician stationed off the coast of Norway logged an unusual signal during his shift. It wasn't urgent, and it didn't match any known identification system, just a faint series of waves drifting through the background noise of the ocean, like a breath being choked off. He wrote simply low volume, possibly human voice. The signal lasted 3 minutes, beginning with a blend of tonal fragments and static, followed by what sounded like speech origin unknown, in no recognizable language, yet unmistakably intentional. It wasn't reading, singing, or shouting. It just repeated itself, consistently, distorted, like a machine struggling to pronounce a final command before its system failed. At first, people assumed it was stray radio waves reflecting off the ionosphere, or maybe a piece of old equipment adrift at sea. But 13 hours later, it returned, identical, same frequency, same duration, not a second off. From that moment on, it became a shadow in sonar logs too faint to raise an alarm, too persistent to forget. No one responded. No one claimed it. It was simply there, patient, as if it had never needed to be understood, only heard. Strange signal structure. When acoustic laboratories began analyzing the recordings, what caught their attention first wasn't the content, but the structure of the waveform itself. The frequency range spread out in a formant modulation pattern, something typically found in human speech. Yet it was so distorted that no complete phonemes could be isolated. In other words, it had the tonal quality of a voice without actually being speech. There was no electrical background noise, no trace of radio signals or standard communication frequencies. Instead of pulsing evenly like radar waves, the signal fluctuated irregularly, more like something emitted from a damaged audio device. Endlessly looping a corrupted recording, they compared it to dozens of known waveforms from Soviet-era automatic sonar stations, the kind once scattered across the North Atlantic in the 1970s and 80s. None matched. No known pattern came close. It wasn't a whale. It wasn't a submarine. It wasn't anything humanity had ever built, or at least anything humanity had ever publicly admitted to building. Over time, among sonar analysts, it earned an unofficial name, the voice loop. Not because it said anything meaningful, but because it gave the distinct impression that someone somewhere was still trying to speak, even if they no longer could. Impossible to pinpoint where does it come from. The signal was detected in multiple places: sonar stations off the coast of Iceland, Canada's underwater acoustic network, even a British deep-sea monitoring array. All of them recorded the same sound, the same repeating cycle. Yet not one could identify its exact point of origin. When analysts began mapping its location, they noticed something strange. The source wasn't fixed. With each cycle, the coordinates drifted slightly, shifting a few kilometers at a time, like a lone buoy slowly carried by deep ocean currents beneath the Atlantic. But no surface device could keep transmitting for over a decade without resupply. And if it was something sunk, it shouldn't be moving at all unless it could move on its own. One theory suggested the signal might come from a device caught in a stable geothermal current, drifting along a predictable path. But that idea collapsed when location data showed the signal sometimes returned to earlier positions, as if it wasn't drifting, but looping, as if some invisible hand or something else entirely was guiding it through a pattern that human understanding hadn't yet deciphered. It doesn't stay still, and it doesn't disappear. It just moves quietly, in the dark belly of the sea, far enough to defy tracking, close enough to never fully escape, always somewhere between two possibilities, not quite accidental, but not yet clearly intentional. The chilling theories. Within the world of underwater acoustic research, no one publicly debates the signal, but everyone seems to carry a theory of their own. Some believe it's the remnant of an old Cold War-era sonar system, stuck in an endless broadcast loop. Perhaps a rescue beacon anchored to the sea floor, long forgotten after the mothership never returned. It sounds plausible, until you consider one fact: no known system was ever designed to transmit continuously, with perfect timing. For more than 10 years, the tech-minded see something different. They speak of an experimental artificial intelligence, once programmed to manage underwater communication, now trapped in a logic loop like a voice assistant that's lost its original instructions and can only repeat a command no one remembers. A rogue AI, alone in the ocean deep, endlessly transmitting a broken message like a song stuck on a warped cassette, no longer communicating, just existing. Others lean toward a simpler, yet more haunting idea. What we're hearing is the final voice recorded in the black box of a submerged mission. Maybe a research vessel, maybe a military sub, maybe something never officially acknowledged. And for reasons unknown, someone let it continue broadcasting endlessly as a form of remembrance. Then there are those who say nothing at all, yet whose expressions reveal what they won't speak aloud, that the signal isn't coming from a device. It's coming from a place, a fixed broadcast point, buried deep below the ocean floor, beyond the reach of any civilian map. And that place, perhaps, is still active. Attempts at analysis and the things no one wants to say. The signal was brought into the lab. Raw data was filtered, cleaned, and amplified across frequency bands. Acoustic scientists tried peeling apart each waveform like restoring a scorched painting, painstaking, fragment by fragment. They sliced the audio into pieces, reversed it, slowed it down, even ran it through voice recognition software. Nothing came out whole. Just fragments, breaths echoing through metal, a loop of meaningless syllables, repeated again and again. In one analysis, a segment was said to resemble the phrase 4 Alpha November, a string that loosely fits the format of a NATO designation. But it might just have been an auditory illusion, like hearing a voice in the rain when there's no one there. When reporters reached out to sonar experts, their answers were mostly the same, either a polite refusal to comment or a quiet admission that they simply didn't know. But in a heavily redacted interview, one retired naval engineer left behind a single sentence: "We know where it's coming from, but you don't want to know what's there." And that was it. No follow-up, no correction, just a pause in the record, exactly like the signal itself, clear enough to be heard, but never quite enough for anyone to speak its name. The loop hasn't ended. The signal is still there. From the first recording to as late as 2022, and perhaps even now. If anyone still has the patience to listen, same cycle. Exactly 13 hours. Same frequency. Not a single hertz off. Same voice slow, halting, like someone trying to say something, but no longer certain what it was. No country has claimed it. No military, civilian, or scientific file bears its name. In a world where every transmission has a sender, this one is a stranger, silent, stubborn, and unyielding. The suspected source lies deep within the mid-Atlantic ridge, where the seafloor plunges beyond 5,000 meters, and most geological maps blur into guesswork. There are no research stations there, no cable routes, no record of anyone ever going, yet the signal continues, steady as a heartbeat, no louder, no softer, as if it doesn't need to be answered, doesn't need to be heard, only to persist. And in the end, the question that sends a chill isn't, what is it saying? It's the quieter, more persistent one, who or what is on the other side, listening. At first, no one was worried. Underwater drones often lost signal for a few minutes before surfacing on their own, just like dozens of times before. But this time was different. It didn't come back. No ping, no positioning signal, no final message. The ocean went silent in a way that felt deliberate, as if it was swallowing its own secret. Then, 3 days later, something spoke. A flickering signal emerged from a place no human-made device had ever reached. A depth where steel would crack like an eggshell. and all sound gets squeezed into a wheezing gasp under pressure. And yet this signal sounded like a human voice. If the drone was crushed long ago, then who is answering us? The disappearance that shouldn't have happened. The sea that day showed no signs of trouble. The sky was clear. The waves rose and fell gently, like breathing, and the underwater drone, a new generation autonomous survey model, quietly detached from the mothership as part of routine operations. It followed the exact protocol, diving to a preset depth, sending a location ping every 10 minutes, and transmitting geological data with a delay of less than 2 seconds. Everything was perfect until minute 47. The location signal suddenly stopped. Its status light turned yellow, indicating the system was rebooting. No one was alarmed. Signal dropouts were common in murky waters, but then there was no minute 48, no more minutes at all. The drone vanished, as if someone had flicked it off the map. No distress signal, no impact, no pressure spike. The only trace left was its last known coordinates, depth 5, 960 meters, just a few hundred meters above the trench floor, hovering over an unnamed flatland. These drones are built to withstand depths up to 6,000 meters. They're armored with layered titanium, equipped with emergency float systems and automatic shutdown mechanisms to prevent implosion. But this time, none of that worked. Just silence, steady, absolute, as if the drone had never existed. The impossible depth. 3 days later, at exactly 2:37 a.m. UTC, a strange signal appeared in the system. It matched none of the programmed ping patterns. It didn't resemble any location data format. It carried no device ID. It was just a string of low-frequency pulses, repeating with a steady rhythm like a mechanical heartbeat. Technicians first assumed it was interference until they traced the source, depth 11, 127 meters, beneath the eastern rim of a depression near the Tonga Trench, an area never thoroughly surveyed. No one could believe it. That depth exceeded the tolerance limit of any civilian drone. Even beyond the safe operating range of manned submersibles, they tried responding with acoustic waves. No reply. But the signal kept pulsing with an unnerving steadiness. The intensity was faint, yet showed no fluctuation from pressure or currents, as would normally happen. It was as if something was deliberately holding the signal stable, defying the chaos of its surroundings. No scientific model could explain it. If the original drone had been destroyed at its initial depth, then what hardware was still transmitting? And why was it now coming from a place no one had ever reached, a place that doesn't even officially exist on the map? The signal returns, but distorted. The signal didn't stop. In fact, it grew clearer. A week after the drone vanished, the data receiving station recorded a continuous binary stream, initially dismissed as seabed interference. But after running it through low-frequency decryption filters, it began to make sound. Not waves, not sliding rocks or currents, but a human voice. The voice was choked, like filtered through thick water, broken and distorted, yet still carried the rhythm of speech, a kind of whisper too mechanical to be human, too patterned to be random. Marine acoustic experts analyzed it for hours. Some heard the word help, others home. Some heard nothing but static. But what unsettled everyone wasn't the words. It was the sense that something was trying to speak, even though it had no vocal cords. When the recording was sped up tenfold, the sound morphed into something resembling a corrupted military radio signal, the kind once used to transmit covert commands during wartime. But the drone had no such functionality. And even if it did, who was transmitting? The drone was gone. So then, what was speaking? And why was it using a voice? As if it was learning how to communicate. What the drone saw or thought it saw. No one expected the drone to have recorded anything. Its temporary memory had long been assumed unrecoverable until one engineer attempted to retrieve a series of data packets previously labeled as unidentified fragments. Among them was something that looked like images, not video in the traditional sense, just individual, distorted frames. Their colors warped as if seen through curved glass. But when sequenced in chronological order, they formed a strange flow of movement. Not mechanical motion, more like something watching the drone. Some frames appeared to capture patterned structures not organic like rock, but not symmetrical like human-built objects either. They seemed to ripple in the water, appearing and disappearing, never staying still. One frame showed a large circular shape, like a wide eye socket, its edges blurring and dissolving as if the drone had just drifted past. A face. The drone's magnetic sensor also registered an abrupt electromagnetic spike. The reading surged by 700% in just 6 seconds, then dropped into negative values, as if energy were being sucked out of it. No known physics could explain it, and no one could say for sure, did the drone truly see something, or was it just the dying hallucination of a machine being crushed at the bottom of the world? So what sent the signal back? The drone was never found. No wreckage, no trace, no farewell. But the signal remained steady, almost stubborn, echoing from an unreachable depth. The problem was, it no longer bore the technical signature of the original drone. The frequency had changed. The intensity remained unnaturally stable. Despite the strong deep-sea currents, the data codes no longer matched any of the engineering team's programmed protocols. An independent analyst proposed a disturbing hypothesis. The current signal wasn't from the original device, but from something else, mimicking it. If that were true, it would be more unsettling than simple destruction. It would mean something down there had learned to speak our language, using our machines, not transmitting data, responding. A quiet question began to take shape. When we drop instruments into the ocean to explore, to measure, to observe, are we truly the ones hunting for signals? Or are we also being watched? If so, then whatever is staring back at us from the abyss, who is it? Or worse, what is it?